friends, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Paige, yada yada yada. You already know what to do if you enjoy this kind of content and enjoy me. But without further ado, I would just want to dive right into this topic, which is talking about the shadow self, but more specifically, since I've already made a video talking about like what the shadow self is. In today's video, I wanted to talk specifically about the best parts, I think personally, of the shadow self and how it actually works really well in your favor. In short, the concept of the shadow self is basically just parts of you that are rejected from your immediate consciousness. For example, if somebody were to just come up and steal your bike from you, you probably wouldn't identify immediately with somebody stealing your bike. You wouldn't see yourself as somebody deserving of that or as somebody who would ever steal, probably. Like I said in my last video, the shadow mainly comes up in moments that don't feel the greatest because they show a part of you that you don't necessarily claim, and that can be a little uncomfortable. But that's why I wanted to share the best parts about the shadow self, because if you can see parts of your shadow and parts of your darkness as being worthwhile and ultimately holding a greater purpose in your own benefit, you know, I think that might help people want to do shadow work a little bit more, and also of course see themselves in their full light, their full potential, because just because you've labeled these parts of yourself as bad or have rejected them or whatever has made them, you know, be cut off from your version of self, they aren't necessarily bad. They're ultimately just characteristics that you haven't probably seen displayed in a way that's really a full development of that characteristic, because every characteristic falls on a spectrum of the way that you can display them. And I actually talk about this a lot on my Twitter and my Instagram, where I actually dive into the zodiac signs and different traits within those and the different levels of consciousness that display that same kind of trait, because like I said, it all comes back to the development of that characteristic. And sometimes all it really takes is for you to reinterpret this bad characteristic to see how you can channel that same exact energy into something helpful. Another video I've talked about this concept recently is the anger is spiritual video that I just put up, so make sure you check that out if you want to know specifically how to use anger in a different way. So basically there's two things. And number one is that your shadow self serves to teach you more lessons about these certain characteristics that are involved in your shadow. This world has a way of putting us through lessons and trials over and over again until we really learn the lesson and we've gone through trial and error enough to really see our full potential and the full potential of that skill that we're working to develop, which mainly I have found happens to be like characteristics in just different parts of your human psyche. All have different areas to kind of work with. For example, there's some people that have anger issues and some people that are very good at channeling their anger into certain activities that are productive, like being an advocate or a musician or things like that nature. I mean, you see how you can take a trait that is somewhat destructive on one end and turn it into something that is so healing on the other end, and that's the duality of all things, you know? It's not just one particular instance. It's not just anger. It's not just, you know, channeling this feeling into something else. You can do it with many, if not everything. Another example of this is like the shadow side of Virgo. That'd be the fact that people see the shadow side of Virgo, I think, more than they see the non-shadow side of Virgo. They see somebody who's critical, nitpicky, and really anal and might be really judgy. But the flip side of that is somebody who is very aware and very keen and uses their wisdom and their reflection of their environment and of what they're, you know, perceiving, and use that to, you know, either offer certain people compassion or, you know, change things around to make things work in everybody's favor, not only, you know, for their own enjoyment, but for their progression. And that is a huge, you know, duality, I think, of that trait of being, you know, anal or critical or however you want to pin it. And the more that you can kind of dive into your own shadow self when you're faced with parts of yourself that you're, you know, you're scared to confront, because like I said, your shadow is uncomfortable. It's not something that feels like you want to own it. That's why it's your shadow. You basically disowned it and put it into another entity, I guess is how you would put that. It's just basically out of your conscious version of self. The flip side to rejecting all of those qualities is that you're losing the good potential of those qualities. You know, you knock out the availability for there to be duality because you've assigned it as bad. And that's where labels, I think, really get to people. They really, you know, get in the way of our own progression. But if we see the value in, you know, our perception not being the end all be all, and maybe there's an opposite side of the spectrum that we could, you know, peek into and offer some light to, I think that that could really teach us a lot of lessons that help us develop those characteristics. That leads me into number 2, which is doing this shadow work, seeing yourself as a human going through these issues. That enables you to learn compassion and to use compassion. You know, you allow it not only for yourself, but for the environment and for other people around you. Just think about it. If you're healing, you're seeing yourself as human. You're seeing yourself as multifaceted and as somebody who was hurt and hurt other people because of it, because that is ultimately the truth of everybody's pain. You know, even the really harsh, terrible situations we get ourselves into, it always boils down to, you know, just people just not really understanding themselves and not really understanding how to feel safe, how to connect, you know, etc. And that's where the compassion is built, but it has to come from yourself. You have to see yourself as worthy of that understanding before you can give it to other people. But when you look in your shadow self and you aren't afraid of yourself and the bad characteristics of yourself, you probably won't be afraid of seeing other people like that too, because you've dealt with it. You know that that's not who you are in your whole essence. And I think these two things put together allow the world to have a more conscious understanding of not only our own life's experience, but everybody else's. Like, it's not as separated as we make it seem. You know, and I'm just gonna be honest here. I'm not gonna come on here and act like I haven't been in a position where I've really been afraid of my shadow before. However, I can talk about it now because I bit the bullet. Like, I really dug deep into myself and took responsibility for the way other people treated me, which I think is a harder thing to do than what it sounds like. In other words, I think that the shadow self also enables karma. It shows a lot of our karma too, because your shadow self can show up in other people. It can show up in other situations or misfortunes that, you know, you don't want to take responsibility for them, because ultimately it probably looks like it's out of your control. But that's kind of the thing about karma, is that it wants to be sneaky. It doesn't want to be like, ha, like you saw me coming. No, karma doesn't wait for you to see it coming. It wants you to know and take responsibility for yourself before it changes, because that's just energy. And I would love to dive into that in another video if you want me to explore that topic a little bit more, but I'm going to skedaddle. I think I made my points here on my favorite parts of the shadow self. So if you have any comments or questions, leave them down below. Of course, check me out on other social medias or learn metaphysics with me on Patreon, all linked down below. Otherwise, I will see you guys in a later video. Bye for now.